Hello and welcome to Hot and Heavy, the Elaine podcast. I'm your host, Shivani Desai. Today I'm talking about Season 2, Episode 4, The Phone Message. Hello everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. I am doing okay. It's a heat wave here in Colorado, so we are trying to stay as cool as possible, staying inside quite a bit. Although today I am recording after a trip to the zoo with my kids. Very fun, but very hot. Thank goodness for those misters that they have, those big fans with just water spraying through it. Oh, we stopped at every single one of those. We were down in Colorado Springs, which is about an hour and 15 minutes away from where I live. And so we had quite the drive. We went early, had some lunch, got back, and now I am recording after being really hot and sweaty outside. I'm not sure if that's going to affect how I sound, but if it does, well, hey, you learn something new every day. So let's get into the episode. This is The Phone Message, and the synopsis from my coffee table book is as follows. Paranoid because his new girlfriend hasn't returned his call, George leaves a series of progressively nasty phone messages on her answering machine. When he learns she's out of town, George enlists Jerry to help him steal the message tape before she can hear George's incriminating messages. Jerry and his girlfriend split after disagreeing over the merits of a Dockers pants commercial. This episode is written by Larry and Jerry. Well, first off, this is an extremely weak Elaine episode. She has one scene and she doesn't have any plot in this episode. It's disappointing, and one I'm sure that Julia Louis-Dreyfus was not so happy about when she got the script, because in previous episodes when she hasn't had much of a storyline, at least she had a storyline. I mean, this is like, there is no point to Elaine even being in this episode, which is a tragedy, I find, whenever they do that to her. So I will talk about the episode as a whole. There are other actresses who appeared in this episode, so I'll go more into those characters. I wish I had more to talk about Elaine, but I don't, so let's just get into it. There's a lot of relationship humor with Jerry and George, and that stuff was really well written, very strong. I liked what they were going for with the struggles of dating and just all the stuff we get neurotic about when we date someone, more so with George's storyline and the whole phone message stuff. But I did think that the episode itself was pretty strong in the sense that it had a point of view and it was very cleverly written, had a lot of that Seinfeld flavor, but I just wish there was more Elaine. So the first scene is in Monk's. George is recapping how he asked this woman out to Jerry. And I really love this scene in the way it's written. So much specificity, which I love. And Jason Alexander really delivers it so well. Some of the elements that I really loved that he talks about when he's explaining how he went into the whole mindset of asking, her name's Carol, asking Carol out. Well, the first thing is that he was pushed into it because Lloyd from his office, Lloyd Braun? I don't think so. But Lloyd from his office called him a wuss. So, that's just a challenge. So he says he has to be in a mental state like the karate guys before they break the bricks. I like that. I love that he has to eat an apple to sound casual. I feel like if you're eating, you sound casual. Getting that enthusiastic hi, I so relate to that because full disclosure, I am not a big phone person. I don't love talking on the phone. I attribute it to being the victim of a lot of prank phone calls growing up. Again, a little bit of a peek into my childhood for you, but I don't know. I've just never been very comfortable talking on the phone, to the detriment sometimes of relationships, both friendship and romance. But there's something about the phone I don't really love. But I do get what George says. When you get that enthusiastic hi, there's nothing like it. The person's happy to hear from you. I think there's less chance for it to be an awkward conversation. So I really liked that specific detail. And lastly, just I want to mention real quick, I love how he wants to get out fast once he got the yes for the date. He's like, no, why would I want to linger around on the phone? I just need to get out fast. It was really good. Then he mentions really quickly at the end of the scene that he and Jerry both have dates on the same night. So the next few scenes are kind of this back and forth between the end of Jerry and George's dates. They're both in the car. And George is talking about his underwear, and Carol is really enjoying it, thinks it's hilarious. Jerry is doing his Scottish accent, which Donna says is Irish, but Irish, Scottish. What's the difference, lassie? Kind of cute, both of them. They're just really establishing both of them are having a good time on the date. We get back to George's date, and he's invited up for coffee. He doesn't go because it keeps him up late. As soon as Carol exits the car, that realization on Jason Alexander's face is so good. And I love the ripping off of the glasses and just so mad at himself. I'm back to Jerry's car at the end of his date. Donna suggests going to his place, ending off the date there. And then we go back to George, and he's just chastising himself on the drive back home. The next scene is in Jerry's apartment. He and Donna are getting pretty cozy on the couch. Why is Jerry drinking orange juice? When I saw that, I just thought that was really bizarre. First of all, to drink orange juice just late at night, it doesn't seem like a late night drink to me. It honestly isn't my favorite drink to begin with. I really don't drink it even with breakfast, but I just think the breath issue with orange juice is not good. So the entire time I'm watching the scene and Jerry's sipping on this glass of orange juice, I'm sorry, I can only think that his breath is not so fresh because orange juice just has that acidic effect on your tongue. Orange juice breath, I can't imagine is good. Anyway, that was just a little tangent of mine about orange juice. So they're getting cozy on the couch. Donna definitely seems into him. A little background on Donna. The actress who plays Donna is Gretchen German. And just looking at her IMDb, she really made the rounds on pretty much all those 90s sitcoms, a lot of guest starring roles on those. She's still working to this day. She's in pre-production for a movie, and she was on Modern Family recently. I watched her demo reel. I was just curious to see if I'd recognize her from anything I'd seen her in more recently. I didn't, first of all. But second of all, she definitely seems to play this kind of annoyed with guys character. That was a lot of what was on her demo reel. So good for you, Gretchen German. You've been acting for over 30 years on that one type of role. So you know what? More power to you. And I think she does really well in this role. I think she does well as an actress, but I really don't like the character very much. We're back to that trope of being that annoyed woman at a man. I just wish she did the Scottish accent. Don't just laugh at him like he's an idiot. I don't know. Not that she didn't like that. She was definitely amused by his whole Scottish accent thing. But for me, it just would have been refreshing that if she wasn't this kind of typical woman we see in sitcoms. Not a lot of depth, just very, okay, let me just humor this goofy guy. Then Jerry gets into the tan pants. Why do I wear tan pants, Donna? I think it's a good little awkward moment. There's a silence. Jerry might not be ready to make his move yet. He just looks at his tan pants. It might have been a little bit of a clunky transition to get to the cotton dockers thing, but I kind of liked it. I feel like I've done that where I'm like, I'm feeling a little awkward. Let me just talk about something. So the cotton dockers commercial comes up, and this whole thing escalates pretty fast. Jerry, you can tell he hates those kind of guys in those commercials. He's not very secure, I think. Like, those commercials definitely have those alpha male guys. Oh, yeah, they're so cool and they're so casual. And Jerry's clearly insecure about that in himself. So he definitely hates this commercial. Donna likes it. Donna says, I like it. I know guys like that. And I think that just digs into Jerry more, like, oh, okay, you like guys like that, I guess, So I can see this being an annoyance for Jerry, just going like, these commercials are so stupid. Pants, 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 pants. I did enjoy the little, but they're talking about nothing. That's the point. a show about nothing. I don't know. That was kind of a precursor to the whole show about nothing thing, but I liked this back and forth. And my husband and I get into these little bickering sessions every now and then about stuff that is so stupid, to quote Elaine, stuff that's so dumb, but you just don't want to back down on either side. I think the last idiotic fight we got into was about the Oprah interview with Harry and Meghan. I found myself defending Harry and Meghan, and my husband hates everything that has to do with the royal family. And I don't even disagree with him about what his problem is with that whole monarchy and all that stuff. I agree with him, actually, but I guess I just was very sympathetic to what Meghan was talking about with what she went through with the royal family and being Black and just the British press. Okay, I'm getting way too into this. But anyway, we found ourselves bickering. I'm getting red-faced. My husband's getting red-faced. It's so pointless. It's such a minor thing. It doesn't really affect our lives, but yet we're not gonna back down. This just needs to be argued about right now. So we move on to the next scene. Yay! Finally, Elaine makes an appearance. She's sitting on Jerry's apartment floor, and they seem to be playing backgammon, I think. I think she's enjoying from what I could tell, I think it was a Jolly Rancher sucker. Those were really good. And I think it was watermelon just based on the color. I love Jolly Ranchers. My favorite is peach. You have to order them because they're not available in the regular stores. You can't just go to your local supermarket and get peach Jolly Ranchers. That's an Amazon order, as I learned. They're part of the Tropical collection, and Tropical is not so widely sold. So back to the scene. Jerry is talking about if he can date someone who likes that commercial. And Elaine says, hey, I broke up with someone because he didn't keep his bathroom clean enough. And Jerry finds this fascinating. We also hear about this same thing. We hear her grilling Billy, played by Scott Patterson, who also played Luke Danes on Gilmore Girls, in the episode where she's interviewing him about being sponge-worthy enough. She says, the bathroom in your apartment, cleaned it this morning. It's spotless. I am with you, Elaine. I don't want to be with someone who's a neat freak who cannot handle, one crumb or something, but I certainly don't want someone who doesn't keep their place at a decently clean level, has some kind of routine to make sure their place doesn't become disgusting. And I lucked out with an extremely clean person in my life as my partner. My husband has taught me a lot about keeping things uncluttered and the discipline of cleaning. And it wasn't like a huge leap for me. I wasn't a slob, but I definitely was more lenient about the level of cleanliness in my place. But it's hard to get upset with someone who keeps your house clean. He does the cleaning. I'm so lucky. It's not that I don't help out. I have my chores as well, and he will never admit this. It's so funny. I'm like, you enjoy it. You clearly enjoy cleaning. He's sort of like Monica from Friends, but he's like, no, I don't. It's not like I like it. It just needs to be done. But I don't know. I don't know if I believe that. I think he really does like it. But anyway, I can never relate to friends who complain about their husbands, how they mess up the house after they've cleaned it. I'm like, oh man, I'm lucky. I am so lucky. Not only do I have someone who cleans, but who really has improved my own habits about keeping things clean. So very thankful for that. But yes, back to Elaine. I completely agree. I didn't date a lot, so I can't say that I had a lot of experience with dating guys and their apartments being gross. I just didn't have a lot of experience with that. So, but I do think that if I did date around, that would be one of the factors I would think about if their place was disgusting, especially the bathroom, because I have a recurring dream that I've had since I was at least 10 or 11 years old about a disgusting bathroom. It's like usually in my dream, I have to go to the bathroom really bad. And every bathroom I find is just gross. There's water dripping from who knows where. Every toilet is disgusting. There's broken tile and you have to watch where you step. I mean, it's so gross. And so I have this recurring nightmare about gross bathrooms. So once again, I'm just so on the same page as Elaine here. George enters with Alka-Seltzer and Pepto-Bismol. He's very distraught. He cannot believe what he did the night before by refusing to go upstairs for quote unquote coffee. Elaine tries to help by saying maybe coffee was just coffee and that some people do drink coffee late at night. But George is beyond advice or any kind of encouragement. He knows he blew it. He's convinced he blew it. He's distraught over it. He's so upset. And then we get into this whole debate about can he call the next day? He doesn't want to call the next day. And Elaine says, no, I love it when guys do that. And again, we see this obsession of George's where he doesn't want the women he's dating to know he likes them. It's so bizarre. And I do think that Elaine's dialogue is the perfect way to sum it up, that I don't know what your parents did to you, because it makes no sense. Like, I don't want them to know that I like them. I don't know. I don't get it. I sort of remember that from high school when you have a crush and you're like, oh my God, I don't want them to know that I like that. But it's like, if you're already dating, what's the point of keeping that a secret or withholding that? It just makes no sense. And I remember being little watching this and not understanding that at all too, because when I was at the age I was watching these episodes, they just seemed ancient to me, the whole cast. So I'm going, God, shouldn't they have figured this out by now? Anyway, Kramer enters and he's got a bit for Jerry to do in his comedy about people not pulling over for ambulances. Elaine fucking loves it. She is laughing. I love JLD's laugh. I've already said that. And I do like how she's like, it's funny. And Jerry's not into it and says, I like to do my own material. And Michael Richards' delivery of, that's as good as anything you do. I thought that was a really great moment. Then George kicks everyone out. He's gotten the nerve to call Carol and he needs the room to be empty, kicks Jerry out of his own house. And this whole performance of Jason Alexander leaving this phone message is so good. It's very well written. I can relate to this. I know back in the day when answering machines, or I guess voicemails are still a thing, but I know I've left messages where I've stumbled with what I wanted to say or just starting a sentence and not knowing how the hell I want to finish it. I am not a good message leaver for the most part. I've hung up the phone many times going, oh my God, what did I just say? Why did I say it like that? And again, just the way Jason Alexander plays it, you can tell in the middle, he's completely dying. He's hating everything he's saying, but he can't stop talking. I just thought it was great. Everybody comes back in and George is freaking out. In his freak out, he talks about how this message is just waiting for her. There's nothing he can do about it. And then Elaine tells this story about her brother-in-law switching out an answering machine tape because of some business information he blurted out in a message. So the purpose of this scene is what the episode is named after, the phone message, and relatable for anyone who stresses about relationships, dating, or leaving messages on someone's answering machine or voicemail. Overall, it's a pretty long scene start to finish, but given that the last few scenes were pretty short, I didn't mind that. I loved George's dilemma and, again, Jason Alexander's performance. It's Elaine's only scene, and it doesn't have a lot of great moments for her, unfortunately. All right, so in the next scene, we're back at Jerry's apartment on another date with Donna. They're having a good time. Jerry says he's never seen an episode of I Love Lucy. Then he does this whole lactose intolerant bit. He won't stand for it. I thought that was pretty funny. While Jerry's in the bathroom, George enters and he's talking to Donna and blurts out that he knows she likes that Dockers commercial. Uh-oh. Donna sort of freaks out after Jerry comes back. Oh, so you're telling people I'm not hip because I like that commercial. My first instinct was to think like wow, calm down, Donna. But I can sort of see her point here. I mean, they got into a little thing about it. He made it pretty clear that he wouldn't really respect anyone who liked that commercial. So the fact that he's talking about it to a friend, I mean, obviously he's not saying it in a good light, so I can see why this would upset her. It's not like he's complimenting her when he's saying this to his friends, so, but I did love Jerry. No, I had to tell my friends. My friends didn't have to tell you. And I can also see why Jerry's defending himself here. He's not allowed to chat with his friends. This is really George's fault. Just like Jerry said in that last line of dialogue I quoted, it's really George's fault. Like, really? Like, why the hell would you mention that? And then it's just exacerbated by the fact that Kramer walks in, gets introduced, and yells, "Cotton Dockers." Donna leaves. Jerry's not all that heartbroken. It wasn't working out anyway. So the next scene, we're in Monk's because George needs to confess to Jerry about all these messages he's left for Carol in retaliation that she hasn't called him back yet. Except for the fact that she did call him back. Apparently she's out of town and using an old machine back at her apartment that she doesn't have the code for. Okay, so back to this whole answering machine prominence in this show, and really all 90s shows. I've been watching a lot of Friends recently because my daughter is super into it, and there is so much answering machine material in that as well. There are so many things about a message on an answering machine or listening in on someone's messages or knowing the code to someone's machine. Like it's amazing. And maybe my memory just doesn't serve very well because I grew up at this time. We had an answering machine in my house. I just don't remember my life being so dictated by what and where and how my answering machine is involved in what I do. This show really could be an education for the younger generation to learn about how answering machines work. So anyway, 90s shows, man, full of answering machine plots. George asks Jerry to help him change out the tape. He's doing what Elaine talked about with her brother-in-law. Moving on to the next scene, George and Jerry, they're preparing to do the tape swap. So they're plotting how to pull this off, tippy toe, lemon tree, how do you solve a problem like Maria, what's going to be the code word, and how does Jerry not know that song from The Sound of Music? Come on, I think he would know that. Carol arrives, and Carol is played by Tori Pallone, and there's really not much to say. I looked her up. I tried to go beyond IMDb, which I rarely do, but there really isn't much about her. In fact, this performance as Carol is her last credited role, so I don't mind her at all, but she really wasn't given much material to shine. They just needed a female body to serve George's storyline, basically. And Carol says she's good to just head to dinner. She doesn't need to go up to her apartment. And George kind of pulls Carol aside, saying, Jerry needs to use your bathroom because he has a phobia about public bathrooms. Same, Jerry. There's a lot of bathroom talk here. I realized this just now. But I don't have a phobia of public bathrooms, but I will try to avoid them at all costs. I do have a phobia of porta potties. I will never use those if I can help it. I would rather go outside in a field. Nope, I'm not going to use a porta potty. I've had way too many disgusting experiences. So they go up to Carol's apartment. George and Jerry act like total weirdos when they get up to her place. Jerry just says, "Oh, I don't have to go anymore. The urge went away." George says he needs to talk to her in the back of the apartment, and that's obviously for Jerry to be able to change the tape. But they almost get caught when she walks back quickly because she recognizes Jerry. She's seen him do comedy. I do like Carol, that is so rude. I mean, I was going to talk to you. So Jerry changes the tape. They come back. That's what you had to tell me? Your father wears sneakers in the pool, which we'll hear again later. I'm sorry. At this point, if I was Carol, I'd be like, you guys are weird. Why don't you guys just leave? I'm going to just hang out alone tonight. This is so bizarre. Then we find out she did hear all those messages. Her neighbor played them over the phone for her. We were cracking up. I just love jokes like that. It's kind of a convenient ending, but it does show how George's neurotic breakdown was all for nothing. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and I'll see you on the other side. Oh, hello. It's me. Yeah, it's Shivani again. I am actually doing a real ad this time. I mean, every other one was real. What am I saying? Of course, those were real ads. This one is for my blog, impressionista.me. I have dealt with different levels of imposter syndrome my whole life. After I turned 40 a few years ago, I decided I just needed a creative outlet to get some of these thoughts out. So I started a blog, and now I do a podcast. So basically, if it's an oversaturated area, that's where I want to be. It has gotten a great response, and it's something I'm very proud of. Over 19,000 views, and a lot of feedback that the posts have helped people in their own lives, because they're either going through something like that or they can relate to something I've written about. Impressionista.me is a blog that provides some insight into the life of a woman, me, who tried the standard only to be lured by nonconformity, and how scary that can be. Please visit impressionista.me for some of my writing, and follow Impressionista at Impressionista Blog on Instagram. Thanks. And we're back. All right, so some of the extras. There was an inside look. Now, I think most of the episodes we've heard about, whatever the episode is about, is an exact replica of something that's happened in Larry David's life. But in this case, it's definitely based on something Larry David had sort of done. So basically, he says in the inside look that he notoriously left terrible answering machine messages, rambling and just stumbling over his words. And it was during his single life. A lot of times it was messages to the women he was dating. And he actually wrote a sketch for SNL about a man changing the tape on a woman he's dating on her answering machine. But unfortunately, it never aired. And Larry David only was there for one season. I think he got one sketch on the air the entire time he was at SNL for that one season. And I believe it was the very last sketch of the episode, which, as we know, if any of you have watched SNL, it's not the one that gets watched very much. I usually turn it off after Weekend Update, I have to confess. Or if the musical guest is good, after that second performance. Sorry, SNL. The Cotton Dockers plot was based in truth with Jerry Seinfeld. He really did hate those commercials with a passion. So that was based off of Jerry's real opinion. And again, not surprising. That felt very real to not only Jerry Seinfeld, the character, but him in his real life, just hating that kind of stuff. Okay, now let's get into Contributor Corner. Greg, who we've gotten some great thoughts from, and I don't think I mentioned how I know Greg, but Greg and I met, at least 15 years ago, maybe now, through a mutual friend that I used to work with. He and I worked together a long time ago for a music company, and then Greg and this person met at another company, and then we all kind of met through that. And Greg and I have a lot in common, especially when it comes to the shows we watched growing up and that kind of fun trivia about 80s and 90s sitcoms. So he was a natural fit to become a contributor to this podcast. So first, Greg says, it seems like it took forever for Elaine to appear in this episode. When she finally does appear, she's not given any storyline of her own other than trying to convince George that his date could still be interested in him, trying to keep him from the inevitable George self-doubt that he always seems to have with women. I do like how it's her story about her brother-in-law swapping out an answering machine tape that George ultimately mimics in his own situation. Right. I mentioned this too. There's nothing Elaine was given that remotely resembles a storyline of her own. Such a shame. Greg then says, Elaine's childlike humor here is endearing, and while I love her always, she's given little to work with. She makes dumb jokes, i.e. Germ's houses near the drain are going for $150,000, and also laughs along as Kramer tries to give a joke to Jerry for his act. I've been thinking more about Elaine and how JLD plays her, and it seems she becomes more jaded and hardened as time goes on. She began more like a Phoebe Buffay and evolved into a Murphy Brown, to borrow references from other hit shows of the era. I like her in these first seasons, but she becomes much more well-rounded later on. We haven't seen her mad yet, and that's the Elaine I like best. Maybe George is rubbing off on her as time goes on. Right, yeah, this evolution of what they started out with Elaine to what she ultimately becomes for most of the series is pretty different. I love the Phoebe Buffay to Murphy Brown comparison. That very fitting. I do like it. And maybe it goes back to what I talked about in another episode about how Larry David told the writers, hey, write her like a guy. That really did give the writers a bit more freedom and latitude to just explore her as a character on the show versus a female character on the show. And I'm excited to get into later episodes as well that are written by female writers, which you can feel that right away. It's great comedy that's written by a female point of view and really gives Elaine some rich things to work with. Greg's third point is that this is a George episode. Jason Alexander plays this part so well as he does the entire run of the series. Neurotic, self-loathing, and insecure, yet willing to scheme in order to get out of a jam instead of owning up to his own actions. Nobody could play this like him, and while this character is obviously based on Larry David, Jason captures it so perfectly I'm thinking about starting a podcast called I've Never Been the Bad Boy. Just kidding. It's so funny you say that, Greg, because there's no denying how immensely talented Jason Alexander is. I mean, yes, this is an Elaine podcast. Yes, I'm so passionate about women in comedy and what they have gone through and the evolution of what we've seen with sitcom characters for women. But as I am rewatching this, Jason Alexander, because it's, like you said, because it's based on Larry David, I think he had the most fleshed out character from the beginning. So he had more time to really delve in and get into how he wanted to play it. I've heard interviews with him where he talks about, well, I'm kind of doing a Woody Allen impression in the first few seasons. And look, I'm not a big Woody Allen fan, nor do I really understand his style. So I can't speak to that comparison. But I do think if anyone nailed the character right away, I would say Jason Alexander did that with George. And yes, throughout the series, throughout the run of the series, it was perfection. I mean, really, really good. And I must confess, too, I've thought, maybe I should do a George podcast after this. But Greg, if you want it, you totally have dibs. I don't mind. And lastly, Greg says, so much of this episode feels dated to me. The mentioning of Dan Quayle, the references to a Dockers commercial, which must have been well known enough at the time to remark upon, and then ultimately the scheme regarding an answering machine. If a Gen Z person judged this show based on only this episode, how much would they understand, and would they even watch a second one? Cassette versus microcassette? Oh, exactly. That's why I said this is actually probably, they should show this episode as an explanation to Gen Z. This is an answering machine. This is what people went through with an answering machine. And the mentioning of Dan Quayle and the Dockers commercial, I think that definitely does change as the show finds its footing, because I do remember reading an article where Larry and Jerry were adamant about not making pop culture references too often because they did want the show to be timeless and feel relevant as much as possible. I mean, you can't help with old tech stuff. Like, you can't help that because, well, what are you going to do? Be like, well, we might have these little phones in the future that are basically a computer in your hand. Like, they wouldn't be able to know that. But there was a decision later, I guess, than this episode where they wanted to make very little commentary on what was going on in the world and any kind of pop culture reference, so that if you watched it 20, 30 years in the future, it's still just these relatable storylines of humans versus, oh, this is in reference to what's going on in the culture at the time. Thank you for your thoughts again, Greg. They're always great. Moving on to Lee. Lee sent in an email about the phone message, and this is what Lee had to say. What I liked best about this episode is that it showcased Jason Alexander's acting chops. I think it took his malignant insecurity to a new level, which only got worse as the series progressed. Yes, definitely, Lee. I think both Greg and I have talked about it now, and just like Greg said, just like I said before, and it needs to be repeated. Jason Alexander just nails it in this episode. So many wonderful moments of just neurotic meltdowns. It's really fun to watch. Lee says overall, he did not care for the episode because he thought the premise was weak. Jerry's comment to Carol that he'd never seen I Love Lucy was interesting because the conflict here seemed like a modern take on something that could have been on I Love Lucy. I would never have thought of it that way. And look, I think I've seen a few episodes of I Love Lucy. I know I watched it in reruns when I was younger, and probably just maybe the most classic episodes, but that's a really interesting take. Then Lee says, as you have already pointed out, there was too much focus on answering machines and it hasn't aged well. But back in the day, you did need a special beeper to retrieve your messages. And machines had two tapes, a short-looped one for I'm Not Here Right Now and a full-sized one for messages. Thank you, Lee. Oh my gosh, there's so much education, not only in this episode, but on this podcast about answering machines. I do remember there were two tapes, though. Yes. Oh my gosh. But I think Jerry knew which one was the incoming message where the messages were left to switch out. I don't know. But anyway, tapes, answering machines, it's just all so dated. recently with my kids, I was helping them make Spotify playlists because I got them both accounts on their iPads, and they're really getting into music, and it's sort of exciting for me. Music was such a huge part of my childhood, and just discovering music and just loving songs and having my favorite song and listening to it over and over, and bands and whatnot. We were all kind of sitting on the couch with our iPads, and I was explaining to them how to make a playlist. I was like, my gosh, one of my favorite things growing up was making mixtapes. I said I would tape songs off the radio, or I would make mixtapes from CDs, and then they're just blankly staring at me. And I'm going, why would they ever know what I'm talking about? And my son just says, what is that? What's a tape? And I think I got osteoporosis just then and there because I felt so freaking old. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, a tape, you know what? It doesn't matter. Let's just make your Spotify playlists, and I'll try and recover from feeling about 500 years old. All right, my favorite Elaine moments, as if I could choose anything here. If I had to, I liked her laughing at Kramer's joke. I just thought it was cute. I love her laugh. What can I say? And there was nothing else in this episode for Elaine. I'm just, it's bubbling up, my rage about that. I will talk about the other actresses in this episode. So this episode is an example where women got zero funny. And I'm actually going to be writing about this in my blog pretty soon, about women not getting the funny often enough. And certainly in this era and this time of when this episode aired and pretty much all of the 90s, predominantly, and I'm not saying there weren't women in comedy. Of course there were women in sitcoms, but when you think about the bulk of the funny, it usually landed with the men. So this is an example where women in this episode, and I'm not talking about Elaine because she had nothing, but these two women who played the dates, they were just portrayed as this like sort of typical sitcom counterpart to a straight guy who was dating. I mean, there's nothing interesting about them. They didn't serve any purpose except to give Jerry and George what they needed to enrich their plot. Now, okay, the show is called Seinfeld, and Jason Alexander is one of the leads, so I get that we're not going to get several minutes of a guest star, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't build some interesting moments. I'm not saying we needed scenes alone with Carol and Donna. That's not at all what I mean, but I'm just saying that, like I said earlier, make Donna do that Scottish accent with Jerry and make her really good at it. Or give Carol some kind of quirk after George mentions his whole underwear thing that he does. Don't just let them be the ones giggling and rolling their eyes and going, really? Just give them something. And I want to be clear that I'm not sitting here and bashing the episode for that, because again, this is what it was at the time. But this is where I learn a lot from my own writing endeavors, watching shows that, for all intents and purposes, are very well written. I mean, there's no doubt this was a very well written episode, but they're lacking in moments that could make it even more interesting. So what I glean from watching an episode like this in sort of the writer's portion of my brain is that maybe give smaller characters the guest appearances at least one interesting moment, which not only gives that actor something fun to work with, but it enriches the audience's experience. I would have loved to see a little bit more back and forth in those car scenes at the end of the dates versus all Jerry, all George doing the talking or the goofy silliness and the women just receiving it and not really giving their own perspective or their own silliness or quirks with that. And just in general, character development to me is probably the single most important part of storytelling. If I don't care about a character, I'll lose interest very fast. And for these two women, I wish we were given a bit more to understand why Jerry and George like them so much. And where's the harm in that? Sure, they won't be coming back after this episode, but investing a couple of lines of dialogue or a couple cute little moments, it just would have made for a richer experience. We do see more of Donna's personality and how she reacts to the Dockers commercial and Jerry's telling George and Kramer about her liking it. But again, for my taste, it's just that typical female stuff we see, the female character stuff we see in sitcoms, so blah. And it reminded me of how they did that little switcheroo with the Vanessa character, where in that first episode she was in the Stakeout, she was so much more dynamic. And then they totally diluted all of that in the stock tip, which to me was a really disappointing decision. They still could have ended that relationship without making her totally different and totally unlikable. But it is Jerry Seinfeld, and a lot of his comedy and notions about relationships, they're dated. I mean, the man is in his mid-60s at this point. I mean, even to this day, his humor and his jokes about marriage and his, the old ball and chain. I mean, it's very, okay, that's what the older men say about their wives. Why would I expect any different when he portrays dating in his own show? And again, I don't want to sound like I'm bashing this show. I just, when I watch things, I really internalize them and think about, wow, how would I do this to make it so the women on the show are portrayed in a more interesting light, with dialogue, with physical comedy, with moments. And so this is just me internalizing that kind of stuff and going, if I were to write this, or if I were to, when I'm writing my own sitcoms or my own shows, I definitely want to not fall into these traps because we've seen them so many times before. I mean, I think that's another motivating factor for me. I am tired of seeing this type of stuff portrayed. But you know what? Comedy is in this place right now where we're forced to elevate the level of intelligence and not punching down to genders or races or different nationalities or what have you, any groups of people. We're expected now to elevate our comedy and make sure that we're making people laugh without putting people down. And you know what? If you feel that you're being stifled because of that, well, maybe you're just not meant to be in it anyway. All right, final notes. This was a George episode. This was Jason Alexander doing a fabulous job here. I have to give him that credit. It's so good. And other than that, I wish there was about 1,000% more Elaine. I mean, why couldn't they have had her be George's accomplice while they were switching that tape? That could have been interesting. That could have been kind of cool. I mean, she was the one that gave him the idea. So I don't know. That, to me, that would have been a really fun thing that they could have given Julia Louis-Dreyfus for this episode. But alas, we just have to move on. And that's all I can say about this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time.